The Kind-Hearted Gingerbread Man. A gingerbread man lay in the baking pan with a lot of gingerbread cookies. Grandmother had cut him out and shaped him and given him currants for eyes and a clove for a nose and stuck a little red piece of candy on for his mouth. The oven was very hot, but it felt good to the gingerbread man, and although it was dark inside, he could see the other cookies out of his currant eyes when he raised his head and looked about him. He spoke to the cookies out of his candy mouth, but they did not answer him, because they did not have mouths. Finally, the oven door was open, and the pan of cookies and gingerbread man were taken from the oven and laid on a clean cloth to cool. The gingerbread man did not dare raise his head to look around, for he heard grandmother stirring in the kitchen. When the cookies were cool, they were put on a plate and set in the pantry. Then the gingerbread man sat right up straight and looked about him. After a while there was a patter of little feet and the scraping of a chair, and the gingerbread man saw a curly head rise above the shelf on which he lay. "Hello, gingerbread man," said the curly-headed boy. "Hello yourself," replied the gingerbread man. "Grandmother said I should come and get you and eat you," said the curly-headed boy. "So I am going to take you out to the garden right now and begin to eat you." "That will be a new experience for me," said the gingerbread man. "I don't remember ever being eaten before. But if eating me will give you any sort of pleasure, I shall be only too glad to be at your service. Shall I begin with your head or your feet, Mr. Gingerbread Man?" "I really do not know," replied the gingerbread man. "Which would be better? Perhaps you have had more experience in eating gingerbread men than I." So the little curly-headed boy bit off the foot of the gingerbread man and ate it. "How does it taste?" asked the gingerbread man. "It was very good," replied the curly-headed boy, as he bit off the other foot of the gingerbread man. Then the arms of the gingerbread man were eaten and a part of the body. "Now goodbye," said the curly-headed boy. "I am going to bite off your head." "Goodbye," said the gingerbread man, just as the boy bit off his head and ate it. When he had eaten all the crumbs of the gingerbread man, the curly-headed boy ran into the house and told his grandmother how nice it had been and how happy the gingerbread man had seemed, even though he was being eaten. "I guess he knew," said grandmother with a smile, "that he was made to be eaten. He was so good-hearted I am sure he did not mind it, especially as it did not hurt him in the least, and he knew it gave you pleasure." "Did it have a heart?" asked the curly-headed boy in surprise. "Oh, yes, indeed," grandmother replied. "I gave him a fat raisin heart, so you could see he was good-hearted. Those who have good hearts," continued grandmother, "find pleasure in being unselfish. For he who does a kindness to another does a greater kindness to himself."
The Good Finger Fairies. One day Mamma was very tired. She had been working hard all the week, so when Daddy went to work this morning she lay down on the sofa to take a little nap. "I have so much work to do straightening up," she said. "I will rest a little bit, and then I will get up and tidy things. I do hope you children will play quietly and will not disturb me." Sue, who was 8 years old, Timmy, who was 6, and Mary Jane, 4, said, "All right, Mamma, we will play very quietly and we won't disturb you." So they all sat down on the floor, and as soon as Mamma was asleep, Sue got out her book of fairy stories and began reading about little Snow White and the 7 little dwarfs. "And so little Snow White lived happily ever afterward," read Sue, "in the beautiful castle with Prince Charming, and all of the people loved Snow White very much, for she was as good as she was beautiful, and the little gnomes came and lived at the castle with Snow White and the prince, and they were all very happy." "There," said Sue as she closed the book. "That was a nice story. I wish I were a princess like Snow White." "I'd rather be Jack the Giant Killer," said Timmy, "and rescue the princesses from the giants' castles. I'd have a fiery horse and a sword." "Wish there were fairies now," dreamed Sue aloud. "So do I!" exclaimed Timmy. Little Mary Jane had been sitting there quietly while Sue read about Snow White and the dwarfs, and now she sat twisting her chubby little fingers and wiggling her tiny little thumbs. There was a sort of a puzzled look on her cunning little face, and she would look at the fingers of first one hand and then the other, not saying a word, but you could see she was thinking. Sue and Timmy watched her for a while, wondering what she was doing. Finally they said, "Mary Jane, what are you looking at your fingers like that for?" "I was watching the fairies," Mary Jane said. "Fairies? Why, there aren't any fairies on your fingers." "Yes, there are," Mary Jane replied. "I have been seeing them for the longest time. Just look." Timmy and Sue examined Mary Jane's fingers very carefully, but they couldn't find any fairies on them. "Can't see any," said Timmy. "Wait a minute," said Sue. "Look, there is a tiny face on her fingernail." "Oh, fiddlesticks!" cried Timmy. "Well, just look for yourself," said Sue. "I can see it plain as day." Then Timmy looked very closely, and sure enough, on each little fingernail there was a tiny face, and when Mary Jane wiggled her fingers, it seemed as if they were bowing and nodding to the children. "Look, I have one on my thumb," Timmy cried. "And now they are beginning to come on the other fingers." At this Mary Jane and Sue examined Timmy's fingers, and then Sue looked at her own and exclaimed, "Mine too! They must be little finger fairies. Just look at your own fingers. See, there are the finger fairies just as plain as day." Then the children all lay flat upon the floor and put their hands together so they could see each other's fingers, and the faces upon the fingers of all the children were very distinct, smiling and winking their eyes. "Let's put our hands all in a row," said Timmy, "and make a parade." They all placed their hands in a row. The face on the right thumb of Sue's hand seemed to say, "Attention!" And wonderful to behold, all the fingers of all the children's hands stood right up straight. "Forward, march!" cried Captain Thumb on Sue's hand. With that the finger fairies marched right out to the kitchen, and, of course, the children went with them. When the kitchen was reached, Captain Thumb cried, "To work!" Immediately Sue's finger fairies filled the tea kettle with water, put it on the stove, took down the dishpan, put warm water in it, and washed the dishes. Timmy's finger fairies rushed to the corner, picked up the broom and tidied up the floor, and then they dusted the furniture and set everything right. And while Sue's finger fairies were putting the dishes away and straightening up the pantry, Timmy's finger fairies hurried out to the yard and got out the wood saw and the wood, and sawed a lot of wood for the kitchen stove. Then they brought the wood into the kitchen and piled it up neatly in the corner. Now little Mary Jane's finger fairies watched all this very carefully and seemed to whisper among themselves. When they had talked it over quite a while, they all got up and, taking little Mary Jane with them, went into the room where Mamma was lying on the sofa taking her nap. Sue and Timmy, hurrying in with the big bouquet of flowers from the garden, heard Mamma talking softly to little Mary Jane. Pretty soon Mamma came out on the porch with Mary Jane's 5 little finger fairies, holding her by the hand. "Run along over to Grandma's now," said Mamma to Sue and Timmy and Mary Jane, "and while you are gone I will clean up the house." "All right, Mamma," said the children, looking at each other and laughing, for they had a big secret between them. "Have a good time," said Mamma, "and hurry back, for I feel so much better. I will have all the work done up quickly, and then we can have a nice little lunch." And the children all looked at each other with twinkling eyes, as much as to say, "Oh, we have a big surprise for Mamma." So they hurried off to Grandma's, and when they came back home at noon they saw Mamma sitting on the front porch reading, and Daddy had just come home, and he was talking to her. "Well, little Mamma," he was saying, "I am glad to see you reading and taking your ease. You did the right thing to take my advice and have Sarah Jane come over and do the work for you." "Oh, but Daddy," she replied, "I didn't do a bit of the work. In fact, I went to sleep, and the first thing I knew, I woke up and little Mary Jane was sitting there telling me the greatest lot of things about finger fairies, and how they love to do all kinds of work for mamma when she is asleep. And sure enough, when I looked about the house, I found that all the work had been done up. All the dishes were washed and put away, and all the furniture was dusted, and everything was in its place, and there was a great big bouquet of flowers on the mantelpiece. "Well, well, well," said Daddy. "Now what do you think of that? I wonder who could have done it?" Mary Jane told me that the finger fairies did it, and that she had 10 little finger fairies on her hand, and Timmy had 10 little finger fairies on his hands, only they were larger than hers, and that Sue had 10 finger fairies on her hands, which were the largest of all, and that while I was asleep the finger fairies all got busy. They all wanted to do something good, because they were good fairies, you know. And they hurried and scurried about the house and did up all my work for me, before I could wake up. "Is that so?" said Daddy, turning to Sue and Timmy and Mary Jane. "Yes, Daddy," Sue cried, "and it was little Mary Jane who discovered the finger fairies. Now that we know who they are and that they love to be useful, we are going to let them work for you and mamma all the time." Then mamma and papa caught up little Sue and Timmy and Mary Jane in their arms, and told them that the world and everybody in it just loved useful little finger fairies, who were eager to do only good and noble things, and that they hoped Sue's little finger fairies, and Timmy's little finger fairies, and Mary Jane's little finger fairies would always be ready and anxious to be good and useful.